Hey there. Today we're going to talk about evidence-based supervision. This is a foundation of the course that you're taking. This is the book I'm drawing most of the information from, but I'm going to tie it to some of your previous courses so you understand how all of your work in applied behavior analysis will fit into the supervision model. Evidence-based supervision is different than evidence-based practice, and I want to set that out from the beginning. I think a lot of students can get screwed up on exams if they're not making the distinction between the two. Although, as you learn about evidence-based practice separately, you'll see there's actually a lot of overlap. With evidence-based supervision, the focus is, shocker, on supervision. This describes a process, each step of which has been supported by research, for performing the activities of a good supervisor. So you're going to watch a separate series of videos about evidence-based practice. It's also a multi-step process. So I just want to make sure that you learn to make the distinction. One of them is really focusing on supervision. The other one is on, as a behavior analyst, how do you select, reject, or retain interventions? How do you make those decisions? So I'm going to spend the rest of this video just talking about evidence-based supervision. And again, I'm drawing it from the materials in our book. The first step is to identify desired consumer outcomes. Well, the first thing I want to make sure I tell you is that this shouldn't just be the next step in a standard protocol that you apply to all clients. There should be, each client should have an individual series of outcomes that you identify. And really, this process should involve input from the client if possible. And if not, then from their parents, their teachers, other people who share their community life with our client. So it shouldn't be a goal just that we pulled out of a book or that we always use. It should be based on the individual's needs. Another piece that's related to this is consumer outcomes should be socially valid. So we're going to learn more about social validity later in the term, but for now, if the definition for that doesn't immediately jump out at you, I want you to go back to your previous materials. I think this is probably covered in 609, 610, no, 611 at least. It might also be 610, I don't remember. Go back and make sure that you remember all the components related to social validity. So step one is first identifying, okay, what are our desired client outcomes? Then we move on to the next step. We specify what staff have to be able to do in order to ensure that our client actually achieves those outcomes. And this is where behavior analysis overlaps completely with our supervision process. Our staff need to create a range of environments and need to be able to demonstrate a range of skills so that our clients can achieve their goals. Well, that's what we do as behavior analysts. So good supervisors identify not just what the client outcomes should be, but also what behaviors direct care staff have to be able to demonstrate to produce those desired outcomes. When there's a disconnect here, often the client will not obtain the goals that we're looking for. Once we know what skills someone has to have, we want to train that person. So we want to train our direct care staff, and we are going to spend a lot of time on training this semester. You will develop a whole huge training project, and we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. I think it's important to say the idea of just hoping that your staff develop these skills through osmosis or being talked at for an hour or two is crazy time. We don't just hope that. We know as behavior analysts that's not the way to develop skills. So I want to make sure that you're focusing on, even if in your organization right now you don't have a comprehensive training process, for you to develop the skills so that you're able to do that in your current organization as you move forward or in future jobs that you have. When completing training, your organization should begin with training staff to perform skills that are necessary to accurately implement interventions that they need to implement. That is, they should be able to implement interventions with fidelity or integrity. So that's a term I want to make sure that you look up again if you're not overly familiar with it. What is treatment integrity or what is treatment fidelity? And how do I go about measuring that? We're going to incorporate this semester as well. But I want to make sure that you're at least familiar, you have a working knowledge, a fluent working knowledge of that concept. I would actually argue that the best supervisors go beyond assessing treatment fidelity for a given intervention. Why is that? Well, it's not just a matter of being able to perform the skill, it's whether or not you can do it fluently in real time. And so I'm going to measure not just whether or not they did each step, but whether or not they did it fluently. I'm also going to evaluate whether they can discriminate the conditions under which they do one intervention versus another. So these are a couple things related to staff training and staff, as we move into our next steps, staff monitoring and supporting staff performance that I want you to think about. We're going to spend our time this semester primarily just focusing on how do you train them, how do you make sure they've got fidelity. But I want you to think about from the beginning, how do I assess whether or not they can fluently implement the interventions, and are they picking the right intervention at the right moment? All right, so that was our step 3. Step 4 is monitoring staff performance. And again, you should have already mastered materials on data collection procedures. You should know every different data collection procedure, why you would pick one over another. Again, you should know this fluently. You should be able to discriminate between when you would use one data collection process and when you would use a different one. If you're kind of struggling with this, remembering this from a previous course, I know you cover this a lot in 611, go back and make sure that you're fluent with those materials. Connect with your instructor if there are questions that you have about these things. This course, I describe it as starting fast and then speeding up as we go along. And so if there are materials that you're not overly familiar with, you want to make sure that you should have mastered before you took this course. You want to make sure you're connecting with your instructor so that you can acquire those skills while you're simultaneously trying to acquire these skills as a supervisor. If there are a lot of things that I mentioned that you say, gosh, I don't even remember covering that, this might not be the right time to be taking that course. I'll just put that out there. I like to see everybody be successful, and if it requires mastery of previous materials, it may be that you put a course off for a semester and you spend more time reviewing those materials. I also think that helps you in preparing for the BCBA exam if you're making sure that you've mastered earlier skills before you move on to later skills. Anyway, that's just an aside. So supervision of human service staff requires that you generalize those data collection skills. We're going to generalize it to a different population, in this case, direct care staff. So you'll need to identify in each situation, how would I assess whether or not they're correctly performing the task? Most often we do that through treatment fidelity checklist, but that's not the only way. All right, step 5 of our 7-step process, you want to support proficient staff performance. And I want you to think about this the same way as you do your clients. You identify what supports your clients need in order to obtain skills that they can perform independently. And so this step, which we'll spend plenty of time on this semester, supporting proficient staff performance. But I want you to think about this as an extension of the methods that you use to support staff to direct care staff. The same methods. What kind of antecedent conditions do we need? What kind of prompting procedures do we need? What kind of consequences do we need? Primarily focused on reinforcement. And so we're going to learn more about proficient staff performance, but if from the beginning you conceptualize this as just an extension of those same skills you use to support clients, I think it'll make this whole process a lot easier. Step 6. What do we do to correct non-proficient staff performance? Despite your best efforts, despite developing training procedures and ongoing coaching and feedback that we'll learn about this semester, there are going to be times when you've got staff members that are not performing to criterion, and there are a number of reasons this may occur. This is again a place where it's nice to draw from material you've learned elsewhere. For example, I hope by this point you've learned about the idea of a skill deficit versus a performance deficit. For example, if you have a skill deficit, someone doesn't have the skills to perform a task. And if I want to support that person, I need to see what additional supports would be needed in order for them to acquire the skills. And to acquire them at a level that's necessary for performance in real-world settings. On the other hand, there are people that have a skill and just don't use it. That's a performance deficit. And with performance deficits, I don't have to focus on more training. They already have the skill. So what do I need to focus on? Here I need to focus on what contingencies are necessary in the environment to alter behavior. So we'll learn more about this semester, but I just want to plant this idea now. The idea of a skill versus performance deficit should yield different interventions on the part of the supervisor. Step 7, we're nearly at the end. We want to continuously evaluate staff performance and consumer outcomes. Why? The supervisor's job is really never done. Assessment is crucial. We have to be continuously collecting data and analyzing data on our staff. I hope that you've also covered the topic of treatment drift or procedural drift at this point in your academic career. Treatment drift is when a person who previously implemented an intervention accurately has stopped doing so. That is, they've drifted away from correct implementation. So as a supervisor, you need to be constantly vigilant so that procedural drift or treatment drift doesn't occur with your staff. Even your best of staff, even when their whole heart is in it, can start to drift away from the procedure as it's supposed to be implemented. So these are the 7 steps of the evidence-based supervision process, and we'll spend more time on this semester. In fact, we'll spend a lot of time on it this semester. But I hope this has done a couple of things. I hope it has explained the basics of evidence-based supervision process, and that I've underscored that this is something that we'll be covering all semester. This is a foundation, and so all semester long, you're going to be dealing with evidence-based supervision. But I hope I've also emphasized that you do need to master materials that you've learned previously in other courses. For example, I talked about social validity and knowledge of data collection systems and skill versus performance deficit and environmental conditions like antecedent conditions and reinforcement, and I've talked about procedural drift, and I've talked about generalization. There are a lot of people who take this course and think, what does this have to do with applied behavior analysis? It should be clear this has everything to do with applied behavior analysis. Being a great supervisor to your direct care staff means applying every skill that you have developed as a behavior analyst. So I want to make sure that you're tying those things together. Behavior analysis and evidence-based supervision are intricately interconnected. One last time, if it seems like most of these materials are those that you're not quite familiar with, you might not have had taken the prerequisites for this course and somehow gotten signed up anyway, or you are having a hard time remembering because it's been a while since you took those courses. If that is the case, I would ask you to connect with your instructor so that you can make the most informed decision about whether or not this is the right time for you to be taking your class. I say that only because I want everyone to be successful, and I believe all of our students can be successful. But like everything else, I want to make sure that the conditions are right for you to perform well. So connect with us if you're worried.